Well, everybody made a joyful noise today. That sounded good. In 2011, you know, the attack, Alan Jackson made a song. He said, you know, I don't know the difference between Iraq and Iran. And it's kind of true. The Americans, we're just sort of on the outside looking in, I think, to Middle East politics and to the Middle East circumstances. Well, this is kind of what's going on here. Why did 5,000 rockets go at Israel on the most holy day of Israel, of the Jewish calendar? And the answer is, in the grand scheme of things, there's the Saudis and the Israelis talking about putting together this peace accord that looks like it's going to work, might work, and it's being developed. But then this is between the Saudis and the Israelis. Well, Iran is Muslim, but Iran is not Saudi. Iran's empire is based out of Persia. Iran tends to be more Persian than Saudi. And it is a problem if you're in this circumstance to say, well, these people in the Middle East are getting together, but we're not part of that. We don't want that to happen. So you take your terror organization, Hamas, and you send 5,000 rockets to Israel to disrupt the peace process. Then you've got Hezbollah, which is another terrorist organization, which is sort of in it and not sort of in it at the moment, but they're primarily Shiites. And so another sect. So really what you have, and we've got guys in this room right now that were in the midst of this stuff, and they could probably tell you, you couldn't tell who was who without a scorecard. There were so many sects, and all of these people get together with each other, and they've all got their own special interest. But in the middle of that, what you have is Israel. Because regardless of who these people are, most of their problems all focus back towards Israel. Well, there was this king in Daniel that was appointed, Darius. Darius was a Mede. Guess what a Mede is? It's a Persian. The beginning of the Persian influence in Babylon was beginning to take place right about the time where we're reading right now. And it extends all the way to today. So Darius the Mede is the king because the past king made the mistake of getting so arrogant he got a little handwriting on the wall, that said, your days are numbered and they're found wanting. You died. And so Darius the Mede is now the king, and we're in Daniel 6. So the events of today trace straight back to this. It says, it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find ground for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, and he wasn't corrupt, and he wasn't negligent. In other words, he was competent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charge unless it has something to do with the laws of his God. So here's one of the problems. If you are competent and honest and trustworthy and do the right thing, it is almost guaranteed that you will have enemies in your organization. They're not going to like that, especially if it's a big organization. They're going to have a real problem with the fact that you are doing the things that you're supposed to do. So I've seen this in my own life. I've seen it in other people's lives. So how did they attack Daniel? Well, they attack him where he's the most honorable. They know that this is the one place where if he is forced to compromise, he's not going to do it. So that's the first thing. If you're doing a good job, don't be surprised if somebody's not happy with you. Just don't be surprised. Chalk it up to doing a good job. So these administrators went as a group to the king and they said, "May King Darius live forever." Because the first thing that people do in these organizations when they do that is when they go to the next person, they try to get the next person to do their dirty work for them. So they try to manipulate him. The royal administrators, all the advisors, the governors, have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce that edict that anyone who prays for any god, or prays to, any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, should be thrown into the lion's den. Now, that's an odd deal. This is a multi-god culture. You notice what they say, pray to any man or God. They weren't necessarily predisposed to worrying about what gods thought. But for the next 30 days, throw them into the lion's den. But what they were aware of is that vanity, that power creates corruption. And that they could get to Darius by basically saying, we want to get to your pride side. So, Your Majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the what? The Persians. It cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Wow. So those that are threatened by your competence may also devise a plan that puts you at risk. You could be personally attacked for doing the right thing. Not because of what you've done wrong, obviously, but because of the fact that you tend to embarrass them when it comes to job performance. Here's another thing. If you're in a position of leadership, or even if just wherever you're at, how many times do you listen to bad advice? Where somebody just comes to you and says, I think, and you start going with I think, and I think brings it to a place where it's not a good place to be. Now, often when I was an administrator, I told our people, for every enemy, you need 20 friends. Because the enemy will spend all of their time trying to tear you apart. Your friends will spend a little time trying to defend you. You have to build a base of being able to weather the circumstances when you fail. People need to know that the failure is a result of your sincere efforts, and they can't read into it any other kind of bad motives. So Daniel learned that the decree had been published. He went to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, gave thanks to God, just as he'd done before. In other words, he didn't do anything different. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asked God for help. Why? Because they knew where he was going to be and what he was going to be doing. Now, notice what Daniel didn't do. He didn't go out in the street and protest. He didn't hold up signs. He didn't go stomp and holler at Darius and ask him, why in the world did you do this? He just went about his business and did what he always does. So they went to the king and they spoke to him. And did you not publish a decree that said no one can pray to any god or human being except to you? And if they did, they were going to be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, yeah, I did. That decree still stands, and it cannot be repealed. So Daniel knew the demands, but Daniel rejected them. Do we have the courage to actually do what we need to do when we know we need to do it, regardless of what someone else might do with it? Now you got to be careful with that, because if you think that you are God's instrument, what you may find out is that knot on top of your head is God hitting you with his hammer, because you may not be as much of God's instrument as you think you are. There's an old saying, measure twice, solve once. Before you go marching down the road proclaiming yourself to be the voice of God, make sure that what you're saying is actually what God intends for you to say. Or as in the famous Taxi episode where Jim is trying to get his driver's license, and he sits there and he says, he's cheating, right? So he looks over at his friends and he says, "What does yellow mean?" "Go slow, Jim." "What does yellow mean?" Jim understood, but he didn't really get the context. Go slow, Jim. There are so many times we make a mistake as Christians where, like Star Trek, we boldly go where no one else has ever gone before, and then we realize the reason no one else has ever gone there before is because we probably didn't need to be here either. Right? And so this is a cautionary tale for us. What Daniel did here was do what he knew was right, but he didn't make a big deal of it. He just simply remained true to his principles. So they said to the king, "Daniel's one of the exiles from Judah." There we go with this Semitism, anti-Semitism. He's one of those guys. And boy, the Middle East is full of that. Sometimes around here we are too. He didn't pay any attention to you. He didn't pay any attention to the decree you put out. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed because he was determined to rescue Daniel, and he had made every effort until sundown to save him. Translated, what was the king saying? I ran my drawers up the flagpole, and now I can't get them down. I screwed up. Here's another cautionary tale for us. You can put yourself in a position where your greatest intentions were all very good and honorable, but then it blows up. And when it blows up, it's blown. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So once again, go slow, Jim. Be cautious. Be prudent. Think about what you're doing. Because even with the best intentions, they can put you in a position where you're going, this is not what I intended at all. That's exactly what Darius was saying. This is not what I intended. I had no intention of putting Daniel in this position. I was just puffed up and going, yeah, I think everybody ought to pray to me for 30 days. Well, now he realizes that the promise and the oath that he made were dangerous. So be careful what you promise. Be careful what you oath. They can be very, very dangerous. Then the men went to Darius again, and they said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, this can't be changed." So the king gave the order. They brought Daniel, and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Interesting that in this case, the person knows that they are absolutely wrong, but what did they stand behind? Policy. Policy. Policy says I have to be wrong. Really? Is that what policy is supposed to do? It's what it did here and what it does in our lives sometimes. We sit there and we'll use a policy or a law or whatever, and we'll say, I know it's wrong, but, well, no. If you know it's wrong, there is no but. There needs to be a correction. But how many times have any of us, all of us, me included, said, well, it's just policy. Well, here it was just policy. And what Darius should have said was what? I stubbed my toe. Screwed up. Somebody go get my underwear off the flagpole. I decided to put it back on again. But no, Darius says, can't do that. Nope. we're going to have to kill the guy because it's a decree. Darius could have made a decree that says the decree can be undecreed. What about that one? Who's going to argue with him? Right? So a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. I'd like to feel sorry for the guy, but I really don't. It's like, doofus, all you had to do was make it right, and he had the opportunity to make it right, but he wasn't going to do that because, hey, I'm the king, and I got snookered by a couple of people giving me bad advice. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. Daniel, has your God, whom you serve continually, has he preserved you from the lions? And Daniel's answer is amazing. May the king live forever. Wow. Now tell me that's not graciousness. Because what it might have been, you doggone right I'm still here, you knucklehead. But he didn't do that. So here's another example. What do we do that's the most powerful example of being led by God when someone has pummeled us? We respond in such a way that shows pure grace. May you live forever. There were 10,000 things he could have said, all of which would have been justified. But he took the very, very, very high road. And that says something about Daniel and his character. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I done anything wrong before you. So Daniel is telling him, regardless of what you said, you were really wrong, but I wasn't intending to hurt you when I was praying. That wasn't against you. That was for my God. The king was overjoyed. The king was so overjoyed that he took everybody else and threw them in the lion's den and said, here, y'all go get it. It's the kind of joy that sometimes we might want to avoid. But it was the kind of joy that he had because he felt like he had been snookered. In today's world as a Christian, what would have been, so let's change this. Suppose Daniel would have been on the outside and Darius was on the inside, and Daniel, with the sense of mind that he had about God working, what do you think he would have done with the people that had tried to trick him? I don't think he'd have done what Darius did. He'd have done something completely different. Because his attitude about this was completely different. What's the point? If you're persecuted and you're like Darius, you want people eaten. If you're persecuted and you're like Daniel, you bless God. Oh, the difference between the two is striking. Now, I got to be honest. Sometimes when I'm persecuted, I'd like to have me a lion. Come see my pet. You might not like what's about to happen next. But in this case, if there would have been a response similar to Daniel's, these people would have been standing there and would have been testifying to the greatness of God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. In other words, they got ate. Even the children. And there's something to be said about that, because most of the time when we start engaging in stupidity, that deals with vanity, or it deals with pride, or it deals with anger, it's not just me that gets hurt. It's my family that gets hurt. It's my family's family that gets hurt. It's second and third levels of problems, right? The ripple doesn't just stop. It does that. And so the ability to turn this stuff loose, because we read this and we kind of feel like it's a sense of justice. And in some sense, from an Old Testament perspective, it was, because it showed the power of God. But in terms of Jesus' grace, It doesn't really show it at all. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and people of every language in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Well, now, here's the problem with that. I'm glad the king wrote that, but the king can't make me fear and reverence anything. The king ain't got that kind of power. That is a personal decision. So, when we tell someone, you're not worthy of God, or you're not really saved, or we say these things, we have gone 10 bridges too far. What we need to be doing in these particular cases is saying, I would like for you to understand why I believe God has blessed you. But the king, this is again one just supreme form of arrogance. I have now decreed everybody shall worship the God of Israel. Jesus never said that. He never said, you have to worship me. He said what? You can. Here's what I'm offering, but you have to decide. The king doesn't see it that way. He's the living God. He endures forever. Truth. His kingdom will not be destroyed. Truth. His dominion will never end. Truth. He rescues and saves. Yes. Performs signs and wonders. Yes. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Yes. All of those are true, but the motive behind it is misguided. So we mentioned this Persian Empire that started with Darius the Mede in Babylonia, which is now expanded, evolved into Iran, which is now using Hamas. I don't want to get into politics, but when you give a terrorist organization $6 billion and expect them to use it in a way that we told you you need to use it, that's kind of like giving an addict a year's supply of cocaine and saying, you can only use it if we give you permission. It's like, wow. It's not just that. Did you ever think that you would watch on TV where a jewelry store, 40 people would just go in with hammers, smash every counter that they could find, take everything that they could grab, and think that this is somehow due to them? This country or somebody owes this to me. I should be able to do this. You can now go into some retail stores in certain parts of America and it looks like Russia. There's nothing on the shelf because they can't leave it out. In certain parts of America now, this one is the juiciest irony of all. When a United States congressman gets carjacked within blocks of the Capitol, this is an Apollo 13 moment. We got a problem. Society, we say these things, and I think sometimes we overstate them, but if we're watching society just unravel, it's just falling apart. We can't decide what's right and wrong anymore. When you look at some of these cities, you have to step over the waste, the human waste that the people are leaving on the sidewalks in front of the building that is trying to make a living. And if you step over the human waste, you have to make sure you don't step onto the hypodermic. How does this happen? When did this go on? The mental illness that's on the street now. My wife tried to engage a guy at the store about 2 or 3 weeks ago. She quickly figured out I got to disengage. Because he just starts, I don't know who he's talking to. He doesn't know who he's talking to. He has no mind left. These kind of things are going on. So the question is, why? Why is there so much evil in the world today? Why, and we use this Daniel 6 to kind of segue into this. How is it if God's all good and all powerful, why are things so jacked up? And we're not going to get into we're not going to try and make a treatise out of this, but it's important to remember that the God of Daniel is the God of today. He hasn't changed. The things are still the same. It's also important to remember Daniel was spared from the lion's den, but Daniel was ripped from his country. So when we think of these things and we go, God is my protector, don't forget what happened to Daniel as a very young boy. You're coming with us. Which probably means his parents were what? Good possibility they were killed. It doesn't tell us. But I can't imagine that would never be spoken of again if they were just living happily ever after somewhere. So there's going to be times when you're spared from the lions, but there's going to be times when you're going to be ripped from your country. Don't think otherwise. A lot of times when you're ripped from your country, it's because you did something stupid and ran your drawers up the flagpole. On your own, congratulations, we did it. You did it, I did it, we all done it. Right? And so to blame God for my stupidity is just going to be kind of not the way it goes. So we got to be careful with that. That's why I said go slow. But there will be times when you do the right thing like Daniel and pray 3 times a day, because for Daniel that was the right thing to do. And somebody's going to try and hammer you on it and you'll get persecuted. And then the question is, can I respond like Daniel or do I respond like the lions? But this world's jacked up. How do we know it's jacked up? Well, in Luke 4 it says this. This will tell you why the world's jacked up. It's the temptation of Christ. He's been led out into the wilderness. Moses was leading his company where? From the wilderness. But where is Jesus told to go? To the wilderness. There's some kind of symbolism there that we need to think about. Moses came out, but Moses came out understanding where he was supposed to go. Jesus went in because when he comes out, he's going to be much like Moses. This is going to be clearly where I'm supposed to go. But one of the things that happens is it says, the devil took him and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time and said to Jesus, I will give all of this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I will give it to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it will be all yours. Now that sounds like Darius. Well, let's just pray to Satan for 30 days and we'll be just fine. That's basically what he was saying. Satan just made a decree. Worship me and I'll give you all this stuff. Now, this is really interesting because on the one hand, we're told to pray for our leaders. On the other hand, Satan just said what? I own them. Now, clearly, there's got to be some balance between these two. I don't think every person that's on the planet that's a leader is of Satan. I also don't think every person that's on the planet that's a leader is not of Satan. When you watch what just happened in the Middle East, to suggest that that would somehow be the will of God is a strange, strange thing. This is the will of Satan going on here. This is destroy, corrupt, tear apart. That's what Satan does. We're told to pray for our leaders. But here's the other thing. I think sometimes we think of Satan as just a concept. Not necessarily, he ain't no real guy, right? The Exorcist 4 just came out. I don't know what that means. I never saw the first 3. But The Exorcist 4 just came out. So now we're going to go through all this stuff again where people sort of come up with this very limited picture of Satan in that context. Can you be attacked by Satan? Yes. Can you be attacked by not necessarily Satan, but by the people or the spirits that follow Satan? Yes. It would be appropriate to say that every time you sin, you have been demon possessed. I don't mean that to go to the extreme side, but what it simply means is you've allowed something other than God to take control of your life. If you've allowed something other than God to take control of your life, what would that be? So when we minimalize sin and just go, it's just a little sin, then what we've done is something other than God has taken control of our lives. We have agreed with Satan. You said you'd give me this stuff, so give it to me. because all the kingdoms of the world are yours. So should we be surprised there's so much evil in the world when Satan has his filthy hands so directly on so much that is going on? You can see Satan at work when these buildings are being cleaned out by people who have no motive other than just, I want to go take it. There's so much evil in this world. Listen to this. There's so much evil in this world because there's too much Satan in this world. You want to do away with evil? Minimize Satan. It's doable. It's doable because what did Christ ultimately tell Satan? Get behind, leave me alone. And it says the angels came and ministered to him. James says, resist the devil, and what? He will flee from you. Well, if you notice that the devil is in your hip pocket all the time, trying to take your watch and your change, then obviously he's not doing what? He's not fleeing, he is pursuing. If he's pursuing, it's because I'm not resisting. How do you resist? This is not how you resist. I'm going to resist the devil. I'm going to resist. Because if you're doing that, what's the pronoun? I. You want to resist the devil? Go feed the hungry. You want to resist the devil? Go help the homeless. You want to resist the devil? Call your mom that you haven't talked to in 2 years and tell her, Mom, we need to get back together. You want to resist the devil? Do something Christ-like. Forget you and let God work through you. There hasn't been a person out there doing the right thing that's thinking about doing the wrong thing. Replace the stupid thoughts with the correct thoughts, and you'll look for Satan and you can't find him. Because Satan doesn't hang around when that kind of stuff is going on. Satan won't be there on October 29th, 28th. He'll be so mad he won't even come the next day. Satan won't be here when we feed people in this community. But our lives so many times are just embroiled in spiritual warfare. So find something to get productive in. And then the next thing is to pray. How many times did Daniel pray a day? 3. That's not a requirement. Paul changes it completely. Paul says what? Pray all the time, continuously. What does that sound like? What does that look like? It doesn't mean that you're crawling around on your knees all day long. That would look weird. And you would not get too many places, right? What it does mean is that while you're doing something, it's just a continual, is this what I need to be doing? Is this where I should be? Am I taking care of business? And so the conversation is an ongoing conversation. The Muslim picture of prayer is what? 3 times a day, you stop, you bow, and you point to Mecca. The afternoon prayers take place at a certain time. God's not on a clock. That's what Paul says. He says, you're not praying at 5 o'clock, you're not praying at 4 o'clock, you're just doing what? Praying. So the more you find yourself in a circumstance where you are being tossed about, then it's probably time to pray more. But man, if we don't learn from Darius and Daniel, if we don't see the grace in Daniel's reply, and we don't see us in Darius, then we're missing something very, very big here. Because there's going to come a time when you're going to have a chance to step on your enemy's throat. I use enemy in quotations here. Where you're going to win. You're going to be able to say, I'm right and you're wrong. And the question is, can you answer like Darius? May the king live forever. He said this after the man had him thrown in the lion's den, for goodness sakes. That tells you something about grace. Grace. If somebody says grace can't be found in the Old Testament, somebody hadn't looked in the Old Testament. It's everywhere. But if we want this world to quit being less satanic where we see the things that are going on, then we got to make sure that Satan becomes less and less of this world. That takes place in everybody's life, one at a time, one by one. That happens by praying continuously and doing the fruits of the Spirit that bring about maturity. But man, it's a jacked up world. And there are people dealing with disease. There are people dealing with addictions. There are people dealing with homelessness. There are people dealing with mental illness. They're dealing with all of these things. And we can't just simply say to them, well, we'll pray for you. Every one of these require a response, a real, honest to goodness response. But when we respond, guess what happens? That's where is Satan? When you look for him, where's he at? I don't know where he at. I can't find him. He's in the rear view. He's in the rear view. He's got his old Ford F-150. He's got a bad flat. He's just sitting down there flopping along at about 14 miles an hour on the interstate. And here I'm going at 75. That's right. Could be a Dodge. You don't want a Dodge with a flat tire, do you? You get the picture. Satan's flopping along and you're soaring. You're going. We have, within our own little church right now, we've had people that are dealing with real hardships. We've had people deal with the loss of a child. We've had people deal with miscarriages. We've had people trying to preserve their child. We've got everything. We've got people who know people who are dealing with drug abuse, and they know that their friends are dealing with drug abuse, and they can't do anything about it right now. We've got everything that you can possibly imagine, and we're a small group. Can you, if you transfer this to the entire community, guess what? It's jacked up. And I say that, I kind of leave this one open to interpretation. But there's a lot of, even in modern, real-time, very close circumstances, a lot of people right now are going to have an opportunity to be able to, like Darius, try to throw someone to the lions, or like Daniel, be gracious and say, may the king live forever. How we respond to some extent is going to be how much we let God work in us. And that is true. So you want peace? Let God do it. Let God help. Turn loose. If there's something you're hanging on to, turn it loose. Be like Daniel. Be like Daniel. He could have easily stood up. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what you would have said, what I would have said, if you'd have thrown me in that place and left me there all night long? I'd be ripping you a new one. And I ain't even got started. And Darius, he's just like, may the king live forever. Daniel says, may the king live forever. Wow. There's so much in that we need to process and we need to hang on to. Because if we become like that, this world can't handle that. Can't handle that. Doesn't know what to do with it. We become the ambassadors for Christ that we're supposed to. Father, we ask your blessing. We ask your patience, because we sure do want to be Darius when the challenge is to be Daniel. May we, in our weakness, become stronger by relying on you. May the physical and spiritual battles that we fight, may they be more contestable and winnable, not because of what our efforts are, but because we simply let your Spirit guide us into the activities that do put Satan behind us. We ask your blessing on this message. We ask your blessing on our church. We ask your blessing on those that we have been called to reach out to. May we be your hands and feet. It's in your Son's name we pray, and everyone said,